said, well, I know. He said, well, those are cast. And I said, yeah, I'm sure they are. But I wanted to suggest to you that there are these two guys who did it in New York, Neeley and Carl Anderson. And I said, hey, you must screen test them. And you must, Norman, because if you do, you will thank me for the rest of your life.
And Carl and I have been dating Mary for the rest of our lives.
Tell them about it. Well, let's segue, because we can talk about this for the next 2 hours, but we gotta get to the film and want to get some questions too.
Questions from the audience.
Exactly. So Ted, tell us, let's kind of move forward. So Norman gets the rights to the film, and this is a Universal picture, but this wasn't filmed in Burbank in some back lot. You guys got flown all the way to Israel in 1972 on location. The whole thing was filmed on location. Tell us how you were feeling when you got off that plane and you're in Israel and you're going to be portraying Jesus of Nazareth in that Holy Land, and you got Norman Jewison as your director. Take it from there.
3 words. Scared to death. I, along with everybody in the film, with the exception of our lovely Mary here and Joshua Mostel, all the rest of us have never been in a film. Mary and Josh had. So Norman Jewison was faced with a complete company of actors that had no clue about what to do in front of a film camera. So much so, if I may share this little anecdote with you to prove how, shall we say, unprepared we all were. Norman got us there early on so we could adjust to the climate of the country and try to look something like we might be desert rats as opposed to people who were living happily on the fat of the land. So he very, very, very genuinely took us apart without letting us know and separated us into groups. The Pilate faction, the Judas and Simon faction, Jesus and the Apostle faction, the priest faction, because we always were together for costume fittings or something before he would take us out on the set. And the day he decided to do the first actual shooting moment with the Apostles and Jesus, we were all taken early in the morning and get into costumes and all that for the first kind of camera testing, if you will. So, whenever we finally got our costumes together, we walked up to the location where he was going to shoot us, just rolling around it to look like we were apostles and friends, so to speak. When he was ready to start shooting, the camera crew was all ready to go, and he walked over to each one of us and he said, okay, fellas, I know that this is something new for you, but just whenever you hear me say action, that's what I want you to do, the thing we discussed, is walk around and talk to each other like you normally would do in regular life. But you're in costume so I can see you as apostles around Jesus. So when I say action, you hit your mark, okay? And he turns to the camera, and we were in silence. And all of a sudden, one of the apostles said, pardon me, Mr. Jewison, you said, you say action, we hit our mark. He said, well, which one is Mark? So that's what Norman Jewison did. Oh my God. It's really a film class to show us what to do. He could not have been more patient and more wonderful and more supportive for all of us and with all of us. That's why we had such a magnificent time. And honestly, why we were able to do what he wished us to do, which was put human relationships into the story of Jesus. Tim Rice, Andrew Lloyd's concept, Lloyd Webber's concept initially was to look at Jesus and the apostles in the last 7 days of Jesus' life on earth. He was perceived as a man by all who saw him. So that's what Norman wanted. He wanted the human side of spirituality, not challenging the deity in any way, shape, or form. Accepting that Jesus is the Son of God, but not challenging that deity, looking at him when he walked upon the earth as a man. So that's what we tried to do throughout the whole piece. And I honestly believe that that visual concept that Norman added to this and made the film is what the reason that you're here today. Because you can relate to it one-on-one. You can relate to every character as if it's your brother or your sister or your cousin. And we all feel the same thing that you do when we perform it live on stage. Like right now, I can feel such a powerful energy coming from all of you here in this audience, and it makes us feel incredible. We hope through the process today, some of that same positive energy will come back to you. I could not be more blessed in my life. I met the wonderful lady who became my wife while we were making the film. Leanne is here today, as is our daughter Tessa. And Leanne is here somewhere. She'll be saying hello to you after the screen. Okay. Anyway, I will pass this to Frank. And let me just say one thing about Frank. He stood up here and said, you know, I've been in rock and roll for blah, 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 blah. He never keeps his own horn. But without going into an extremely long list of bands for whom he has either managed or worked with or done publicity or what have you, Metallica has been this man's brand.
Well, you know, one thing I forgot to do, is we always do this with our audiences, is find out, we do, you know, kind of get to know them type of thing. Hey, how many people out here have seen the movie Jesus Christ Superstar? Put your hand up. Okay, so how many people here tonight have never seen this movie? Put your hands up. Wow. All right. So you guys are in for a treat, because a lot of people who have seen the film, you know, during Easter, Christmas, you've seen it on the Sundance Channel or on Channel 2 here in the Bay Area over the years. You're never going to see it like this. This is a brand new, restored, remastered print from Universal Studios. It's a DCP, so no more reels. The last time we were here, we retired the 35mm print, and we're not playing that anymore. This one looks like it was filmed like a year ago. So you guys are in for a real treat on that. Tell us a little bit about your relationship with the great Carl Anderson. Carl played, for those of you who don't know, big round of applause. Carl Anderson plays the part of Judas in this film, and he passed away 11 years ago from leukemia. And every screening we dedicate to him. And at the end of this film, when the credits roll, it's usually there's silence. But we do something different with this screening where we actually have Carl walk us out. We play a live version of him singing Superstar from 1997, which is it's a bootleg tape. Nobody can have it, but you can meet me around the corner and saw you around. But we play Carl singing us out every night. But tell us a little bit about, give us a story about you and Carl when you guys first started doing this on stage.
Fortunately, Carl and I had parallel lives as children. He grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. I grew up somewhere in north central Texas. But we grew up in music. We both were with bands. We traveled all over the country and crossed paths a lot of times with bands. And so we had a pre-existing relationship, which Norman Jewison told us, thanks to Barry, that once we got on the film set in Israel, I asked Norman how come he picked Carl and myself for these two central characters when he had so many extremely talented and well-known actors who were being tested for those roles. And he told me that once he sat and watched the test that Carl and I did, that he saw a personal, honest human relationship between these two men. And that's exactly what he wanted to see in his film. And he said, I'm not trying to say that actors couldn't achieve a personal relationship, but he said, I just saw an honest thing with the two of you that was so comfortable. That's what I was hoping to see between these two characters. So that's what actually got us the film, thanks to Barry making sure he did a screen test for the two of us. And we always laugh because, you know, you're doing these characters, and it's not the easiest thing in the world to do because all of you guys know the story of Jesus. So you know what Jesus is supposed to be about and or look like and or carry on with people. And so we both felt we were always, under the microscope because everybody knows these people. So it was terrifying, extremely terrifying. And in that pressure of knowing it was terrifying, we found a lot of humor to help each other along. We always knew that each of us had each other's back. No matter where we would go vocally in the show, the to support that. And I remember we were together so long, I mean, during that time between doing first in the Universal Amphitheater and then doing the film and the film coming out, and then all these years of touring after that, doing the show. We seldom saw our families. And I remember one night at a news conference, and it was actually in Chicago, quite a long while ago. Someone asked Carl, how is it being on the road with Ted all the time? There was silence. And Carl looked at me and said, Neeley, we should get married. The cameras were rolling. So, one of the most wonderful human beings that walked the face of the earth, one of the most talented singers ever. His spirit is right here, right here. He's always with us, no matter where we are or where we go. And tonight, when you see his performance on this new DCP print, you'll see why this movie is very successful.
Tell us a little bit about the filming conditions out there. So Israel, so you're talking, what, 110 degrees, and you're wearing that big old purple robe?
Oh, yeah. It was very, very hot and very dry. And I remember the only thing I really, it was very hard for me, I was wearing pinchy shoes. And anyway, and I had a cape to schlep around. I always felt like I was going to fall off a rock somewhere. When I was way up high, I was looking down the oh dear. I actually couldn't walk up there. I had to get a stage crew guy to carry me over the shoulders up to the top because I was terrified. And every day we had basically an English crew, and every day in the luncheon they served curry. Now, curry is a wonderful dish, and I suppose if you're used to, being an Englishman during the hot weather, you like curry. It makes you sweat. You feel okay. For me, curry did not exactly do that, and they had great big tubs full of melons, huge iron washing tubs full of cracked ice and watermelon, all other kinds of melons. That's what I lived on, really. And one day they disappeared. One day they weren't there anymore. No more melons. So I ate curry. But it was very, very hard work. Physically hard work. It was. I wasn't worried about the words. I wasn't worried about the character. I knew all of that. I wasn't worried about the movements. I was comfortable with everything except the schwitzing and the sweat dripping down into my eyes. And it was just very hard work. And I loved it.
How many months were you out there?
I was out there less than Teddy. I was actually, Norman invited me out to Eilat, where they all went scuba diving and stuff like that. But I was living with, in a situation that didn't allow me to get there early. And I joined much later, many weeks later, when they were already away from Eilat, and he and I went to everywhere. We went to Jerusalem. We filmed in Jerusalem. I remember going out to the actual Garden of Gethsemane, which is not the latest in the film. It's this dusty little olive grove. But I remember sitting there and thinking about Jesus and looking across the road to Jerusalem, which was vibrating because of the way the sun affects your vision, and you get these ripples. And I thought, oh Lord, that's what he saw. It was terribly moving to walk up the Via Dolorosa, which he walked up carrying. It was just a dirt path, I suppose, in those days. It's steps now, but even the steps were tough to get up. And I remember going through all of this stuff in my mind as we were doing it, and it was incredibly moving. It was worth all the blood and sweat and tears that we went through. It was absolutely thrilling. Really.
So one of the things you perform this show on stage countless times. We're actually going to try to count as many and maybe get them into the Guinness Book of World Records for performing the same character on stage or in film the most times of all time. But we've seen your performance on stage and your performance on stage. The one thing, they're doing these screenings, and we've done, the last time we were here was our second screening, we're just kind of testing the waters. We've done about 40 of these things now. We're going out again and doing them. But the one thing about the movie that I think people really gravitate to and watch over and over again, and Norman Jewison had a lot to do with the screenplay, because the screenplay of this movie is different from what you saw on stage. And a lot has to do with that bus. If you've never seen the film, believe me, stay with me on this. There's a bus that shows up, right? You're going, Buster and Jesus' time, okay, what does that mean? But at the end of the film, Norman decided to put all of the cast back on that bus and drive away, except for this man. And that kind of Rod Serling, Twilight Zone sort of ending is, I think, one of the reasons that the myth and the legend has grown over the last 42 years about this film and the character, and especially your performance. You want to say something about that and Norman Jewison's idea of doing that?
What do you think? Should I say something about it?
Yeah.
Norman Jewison is the one person who gets the least amount of publicity and or credit for making this film happen. Without Norman Jewison, I think this may never have been a film. Not only because of the circumstances and how Barry introduced Norman to the project, but also because just listening to 3 songs gave the man the idea to not only do the film, but he wrote the screenplay with a man named Melvin Bragg. They wrote the screenplay together for this film. So it's not taking anything whatsoever away from Tim and Andrew, because they created this with their magnificent lyrics and an overwhelmingly beautiful score. But Norman had a visual idea because of looking at Jesus the man in the last 7 days of his life. He had a visual conceptual idea that I don't think anybody might have been able to dream up, if you will. And he wrote that down with Melvin Bragg. And he was adamant on a daily basis to all of us to maintain that humanity, the reality of human beings, as opposed to gods and somewhere else, but the human being, the element of human being going through life and the trials and tribulations of sin that we all have. So Norman did everything he could throughout the picture to maintain honesty. He got the singers he wanted. He got magnificent dancers through his connections because he flew to Toronto. He lives in Toronto. The choreographer, Robert Iscol, is from Toronto. They put dancers together from the ballet company in Toronto, the National Ballet of Canada, and many dancers in America as well. So he had a core of people who were at that time embracing the essence of that time, the hate-history period of America, the Vietnam War, coming to an end, all of that. So we were in one mind, basically, with what we were doing in the film. Now, the last thing you asked me was us. So, he didn't want it to look like the standard opening of a film. He didn't want to make things be miraculous in the first moment. He wanted to show the world that we were a group of singers and actors and dancers, performers who were traveling, doing a show on tour. Ergo, the reason for the bus coming way in the distance, coming toward the camera. And the bus drives up and stops, and we all get off dressed in Martin Street clothes. And we unload the props and the cross and everything from the bus. And by the time it gets to the end of the overture, where it really announces that we're all in costume and ready to go about the picture. And that's exactly the way it happens. Then fade out to the ending. The reason the film ends with the crucifixion. Tim and Andrew, again, were dealing with Jesus as a man. They did not want to jump in the deep water of the resurrection, nor the, shall we say, life after. So Barry and I have been waiting for part 2 now. So he and I were both very adamant about at least suggesting resurrection as a crucifixion, because the crucifixion is written into the piece. So Norman felt that the best way to do that would be to focus upon the cross as the last image that you see of the cross being the image of Christianity in the sunset. And he did it so beautifully with that 1,000mm lens and that 70mm Panavision camera and all that. So that he focused on the cross, and throughout the entire, it's called John 1941, piece of music that happens at the end of this piece. You see the cross. Keeps pulling away. You see the cross in the sunset. It gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And while that's happening, the entire cast is getting back on the bus, looking off the distance toward the cross. Everybody was on except the guy that played the role pretended to be Jesus of Nazareth. The idea of that was to embrace the Spirit. The Spirit of Christ lives on. And he felt that if that guy that pretended to be Jesus of Nazareth got back on the bus, it would be almost like taking a bow and expecting an applause. He wanted to have a spiritual connection so that hopefully the message that was in the piece would last, would linger within our hearts, so that we would walk out of the theater feeling some emotional connection to that wonderful story of Jesus of Nazareth. Ergo, I didn't get on the bus. Told that story to a journalist a while back, and he said, interesting, I just thought you didn't have a ticket for a round trip.
Well, whatever that idea that Norman had, it sure worked, because that definitely makes an impact in the film. For those of you who haven't seen it, you'll check it out tonight. Give Ted your review afterwards, he'll be upstairs. But one more thing I want to talk about, we're going to take a couple of questions and we'll start the movie. Tell us a little bit about reprising your role on stage in Italy. These guys were in Italy with the Von Element last year in Verona, in the Coliseum, that held 13,000 people, and they did 2 shows in one day, performing the show again. Tell us about getting in those shoes again, Barry, being in front of those people with them.
Well, it was really, because it's nothing to do, okay, it's not anything to do with Italy. Teddy was doing this tour of Italy, and we talked on the phone at one point, and I said, get me in your show, I'd love to do the show with you again. And I guess he did, because I went over, and I was in Rome, and Verona, and Milan with him there. Now, the show that we did on Broadway, Ted and I, it had a different focus. The focus on Broadway was, here was a guy sent out from Rome to take care of this unruly country. And it wasn't a very good job. It was a difficult job that he was handed. And they were sort of testing him. And he knew that if he failed, they were going to drag him back to Rome, probably in chains, and probably execute him. So he was desperate to get this rabble-rouser out of the way. That was really the focus, for me anyway, on Broadway. When I went to Italy and joined the company that Ted was with, and we rehearsed for very little time, maybe 2 days, and Teddy and I started to get, I was having some word problems and blocking problems and so on. It's been a while since I've been on stage, and a longer while since I'd sung. But the first performance that I did with Teddy on the stage with the lights and the orchestra, the band, I had that iconic moment with him after the flogging where I picked him up off the ground and held on to him. And I looked down at Ted, and he was crying. And I started crying. And I suddenly thought, this is going in a very different direction. This is a story about a man of power, Pilate, who has, in a heterosexual way, come to love this fellow who so fervently believes in his ideas. And I started to cry. And I had to walk up this flight of steps, and I looked back at Teddy, and he was beseeching me to save me. And that made it worse. And when I finally got to the top of the steps and whirled around and did all that stuff about, don't let me stop, your great self-destruction, plunged my hands into the water was flying through the air, but there was still blood on my hands. So I thrust them back into this, what looked like a big glass bowl full of water, and there was a blood bag at the bottom, which I squeezed, and the whole bowl turned red. Fervent red. And I looked down at Teddy, and then I looked again in the bowl, and there was this crown of thorns that was made out of chrome, metal chrome. And I walked down the steps toward him, laid it on his head, and clasped my hands as if in prayer over him. It was fantastic. It was fantastic. And I have never felt that way on stage before. I have never been involved that way with another actor. And I realized how much I love Teddy. And the feeling between us was palpable. You could feel it in the air. And that made the difference to that show. For me, and I think for Teddy too. That was the difference between the movie, doing it on Broadway, and doing it in Italy. It was phenomenal. Really. And I love that
story. Should we take some questions? Please, yes. Anybody have any questions? Put your hand up and you can go ahead. Yes.
I am fortunate enough that I was playing for Jesus this summer, and
You have, or you're going to?
I will be playing summer, and I wanted to ask you, way back when you first played the role, how did you prepare for it?
There's a little book called the Bible. There's a few passages in there. There's kind of big facetious stuff. Well, I had the amazing advantage as a child going over to Texas. Please sit with you can come up and stay with us if you like. I had an amazing experience as a
Pick it up, you two.
Seriously, I had an amazing experience as a child. I lived in Texas, very, very, very religious, tiny community, churches everywhere. By the time I was, say, 9 or 10 years old, I could pretty much quote a verse, anything from the Bible, because I loved the stories. And I was singing in the church choir, so I was all part of that. So when I got the opportunity to play in the first production, and the director, Tom O'Gorman, who has been areas of mine, I had worked in hair with him for 3 years prior to that, so we were good friends. He's the reason I was cast in hair, he was the reason I was cast in Superstar. And when we were rehearsing, putting, the apostles together to get the Last Supper and all that together, he said to the apostles, guys,